Good evening and welcome to a regular meeting of the Plymouth Charter Commission this 24th day of January. By order of the Plymouth Board of Public Health, this meeting is entirely on Zoom, coming to you from an assortment of locations. My name is Bill Abbott. I'm the chair of the commission. And tonight we have, I believe, all commissioners present except Scott. And let's see, looks like we have 8 commissioners present. The commissioners and speakers tonight have been pre-registered to participate in this webinar, and it is being recorded. So please raise your real live hands when you want to speak, because I'll be able to see them. And others wishing to speak during public comment, which is at 8:30 tonight on our agenda, should use the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen. And our staff person, Michelle Turner, will recognize you and invite you to join us. So it being 7 o'clock, and we have our guest speaker present on Zoom. So I'd like to welcome tonight Mr. Edward Gadsby. He is the long-term moderator of the town of Brookline, and he has said, he'll tell us more about his experience, but I understand he's been associated with the Brookline town meeting for many, many years. And his background, he was a lawyer practicing in Boston, and he's now recently retired. So Mr. Gadsby, welcome to the Plymouth Charter Commission.
Thank you, Bill. I'm honored to address your group. This type of opportunity doesn't arise very often. As Bill said, I'm a corporate lawyer. I practiced in Boston with a large firm for many years. I was a moderator of the town of Brookline for 27 years until last May, when I bowed out and my successor took over. I've actually worked just as hard since I was appointed as assistant moderator. My main job is to help my successor break into a very difficult job, particularly in a complicated environment such as we have in Brookline. My thought was that I'd talk for 10 minutes or so. Bill can tell me if I'm rambling on too long about what works and what doesn't work in our town meeting in a community almost the same size as Plymouth, the second largest, I think, representative town meeting in the state at this point. A little bit about the nature of Brookline. It has always been a very liberal community, spawning such eminent residents as Mike Dukakis. So it's a community full of political activists. And in recent years, last 3 or 4 years, there's a growing population in Brookline and in town meeting of self-styled progressives. I call them the defund the police cohort, and all of that, whatever that implies. And you'll see that as I go through my presentation, these two aspects of our community will show up in various ways. Well, what works is largely a result of the political activism and the many residents who want to be involved in town governance. We have a highly educated and involved group of town meeting members. Their education about what comes before them really takes place in several different contexts. We have a town meeting members association which sponsors a listserv on which all town meeting members can participate and speak to each other, subject in cases of people on committees subject to the open meeting law to those restrictions. In any case, it's a very active forum for discussion, and not always as polite as you might want. So that's one medium through which our town meeting members participate and become educated. There are precinct organizations. We have 17 precincts and 15 town meeting members in each. So our town meeting is about double your size. And I would say in half of the precincts in town, these precinct organizations are very active, and they hold meetings and discuss articles that are going to come before them on the warrant. So that's a second forum. The third, of course, are the documents that are circulated relating to the warrant and the issues. And we have publication rules that are very helpful because the combined reports of the select board and advisory committee, the finance committee, on warrant articles is required to be published, sent to each town meeting member 14 days ahead of, before the first session. And so there's plenty of time for town meeting members to be educated on the warrant and the reports of the two main principal players in our town meeting, the select board and the finance committee. Another rule that's very helpful in terms of keeping town meeting members abreast of what's going on are that we require that any motions, any substantive motions, amendments and so forth be published at least 48 hours before they're going to come before a town meeting. And in the case of those with financial implications, the requirement is at least 5 working days, business days ahead of time, to give the select board and the town meeting members get to town meeting, they're pretty well educated in what's the issues that they're going to have to deal with. Our town meeting rules are also helpful in terms of at least in running an efficient town meeting. I always tried to balance the democratic aspects of the town meeting form of government with efficiency, and tended, if you listen to enough people, to err on the side of efficiency. In any case, our rules are essentially moderator generated. They're not generated through the charter or bylaws. There's a 50-page town meeting handbook, which essentially I and my predecessors have drafted, and I have established the rules by which the procedural rules by which our meeting is conducted. And that's, of course, helpful because I can create rules that are responsive to procedural issues that we run across. There are also a series of helpful rules that we follow that may or may not exist in your town meeting, but we have time limits, and currently these time limits are three minutes per speaker. We have a very liberal, at least I and my successor have allowed motions to call the question to terminate debate on a fairly regular basis. And in our town meeting, the moderator really organizes debate ahead of time through this listserv that I mentioned. People sign up to speak, and the moderator orders the speakers and representatives of the select board and other cognizant bodies and town meeting members pretty much on a alternating, where there's a controversy, alternating pro and con sides, so that helps move things along and get the issues aired fairly early in the game. Of course, town meeting here in Brookline, as in most municipalities in Massachusetts, only meets one or two times here in Brookline a year. But the business of the town government is conducted not only by the select board, the finance committee, but by a huge number of standing committees. We have 30 or 40 standing committees that deal with various issues that are important to our particular circumstances in Brookline. The select board appoints most of these committees, that the standing committees, and they deal with things like fiscal policy, economic development, housing issues, which are critical in our town in this environment. There are also ad hoc committees that appointed by the moderator or the select board pursuant to town meeting directive. Town meeting requires that the moderator appoints a committee to look into various issues that have come before town meeting, so that there is this constant deliberation going on with these committees outside of town meeting that involve many more citizens than just our town meeting members. So another way that citizens become involved in our town meeting and satisfy the wishes of our particular population to be involved in town government. Well, for many years, this worked well. It was very difficult up to 1994 when I was first elected, mainly because of the existence of rent control, which was a huge and very controversial issue in Brookline. Well, the year I was elected was the year that the rent control was abolished statewide, and I haven't had to deal with that. But for many years, we ran town meetings that went for 2 at most 3 nights that involved little contentious arguments, but there were always those. But in the last 4 or 5 years, as I said in my write-up, there has been a increase in the complexity of issues coming before town meeting. Brookline is a very complex society. We're surrounded on 3 sides by Boston. We're we're really a combination of an urban and a rural community, so that that's reflected in more and more in the issues and the articles that come before town meeting. In any case, in the last few years, there's been a growing an increase in the amount of contentiousness in the proceedings in town meeting. And it may be a reflection of the national malaise. I don't know, but it seems to stem from younger people moving into the community who are not wedded to the traditions and the way we've been governing our town for many years. They're doing their damnedest to hijack town meeting for their particular set of agenda items. This has resulted in much longer meetings, much more edgy and controversial discussion, and the meetings in the last couple of years, particularly since we've gone to remote meetings, have lasted for 5 or 6 sessions, which was unheard of 5 or more years ago. And this is, in the view of many of us who have been in town meeting, I've been either a town meeting member, a member of the finance committee, or moderator for over 40 years, is a distressing development and has led many of us to start at least thinking about alternate forms of government. And that's what's going on right now. There is a petition for the appointment of a charter commission that's mainly being circulated by high school kids and college kids. But it has about 4,000 signatures at this point, and we're likely to have a charter commission within the next couple of years, which would have been unheard of 5 or more years ago, just because of the loyalty of town meeting members to that form of government. But the recent developments have created a much different kind of atmosphere. It's not an issue that can be dealt with by charter or bylaw amendments. It's a matter of the disposition of town meeting members and the electorate, and you can't govern them by bylaw, as you well know. So that is really a sort of overview of where we are with our town meeting, and I'd be happy to answer questions that any of you have.
Thank you, Mr. Gadsby. You kindly filled out a set of responses to questions which we developed a few weeks ago to send to our various out-of-town guests. So, and that's been sent to all the commissioners. It's full of information as you presented it back to us. So we'll open it up to commissioners now to ask you questions. I would make a couple of brief preliminary observations from your responses that Brookline's population is very similar to Plymouth's. I guess it was 56,000 at the last go around. Your school population is 7,000. You have a budget of 302 million. You had a town meeting of 255 town meeting members that meets, I guess, as you just said, 6 times now, which some towns do that quite regularly. We don't in Plymouth, and I guess you didn't in Brookline until recently. So questions from the commissioners or observations, or floor is open to ask Mr. Gadsby questions. Betsy Hall.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Gadsby. Could you tell me what your attendance is like out of the number of total town meeting members? What percentage typically comes to a town meeting?
Well, it depends upon whether it's an in-person or a virtual meeting. In in-person meetings, which we conducted until the pandemic hit, the attendance was almost always 80% plus. Rarely hit 90. Since the pandemic, we've been holding virtual meetings, and the attendance has been extraordinary. It averages 95% out of 250 town meeting members. that's pretty good. I think it points, in my mind, to a development that all representative town meetings ought to be thinking about, and that is, once the pandemic goes away, instituting hybrid meetings in which you can attend either in person or remotely. The technology for that is difficult, and we're working it out in Brookline because we have a home rule amendment before the legislature now to validate hybrid meetings, which are not currently legal under current law. So, but I attribute the virtual town meeting attendance to the ease with which town meeting members can attend remotely, and remarkably, almost all of them, with one or two exceptions, are sufficiently computer literate to be able to join Zoom calls. So I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, thank
David Malaguti. Yes. David, we can't hear you, so turn on your speaker.
Sorry, buddy.
Thank you.
Mr. Gadsby, your experience and your knowledge is very, very much appreciated. I would have to ask you, do you think that eliminating or cutting down, I don't want to use the word eliminate, diminishing the number of town meeting members per precinct would help? I guess the question would be, do the progressives outnumber the old folk?
Well, I have to believe that whatever that the percentage of the troublemakers is going to remain pretty constant, no matter how many town meeting members we have. There are about 4 or 5 precincts out of our 17 in which that are dominated pretty much by this cohort. So it's not a matter of the gross number of town meeting members. It's a matter of the percentage who have this disruptive agenda.
Thank you.
One of the issues that we're facing is some people are calling for term limits. How does Brookline feel about term limits for town meeting members or select board members?
There's no issue about term limits. The issues are really focused on the police department and its funding and its functions. And there are, of course, different views about how to allocate the town's resources. It's a huge budget and a huge amount of income to allocate, but there are certainly controversies about where it ought to go.
Right. Other questions? David Peck. Dave, you're silent.
Yep, there we go. I have 2 questions. Also, Mr. Gadsby, thank you for coming, and both your verbal answers and your written ones are very instructive. So 2 questions. How would you, it's maybe in the old days, but how many hours of deliberation would you calculate are taking place these days each year? Because I did a calculation. If you have 2, a fall and a spring, and you have as many as 5 or 6 sessions, my calculation was anywhere from 40 to 50 hours of town meeting deliberation could be taking place this, recently.
Well, it's actually around 20 because each session we start at 7 o'clock and conclude at 10:30 or shortly thereafter. So it's 3.5 hours per session. So 6 hours, 6 sessions is about 20 hours. That's still a hell of a lot in my view, and unnecessarily a lot.
Okay, good. And so in the older days, it would be less than that.
Yeah, we pretty much, we would conduct, I think it's fair to say that it averaged 2 or 3 meetings per town meeting, the annual and the regular fall town meeting. We also used to have maybe one, now probably have 2 special town meetings outside of the regular 2 spring and fall meetings. But those never last more than one session.
Okay, related question, how many warrants or articles does each town meeting consider?
Well, I
Not a
think
trick question.
no. Historically, it was around 30. Now it's ranges from mid 30s to mid 40s. The problem is not. It seems like the issues are much more intractable, controversial, and difficult these days. So a 35 article warrant is going to take 6 hours or 6 sessions rather than 2 or 3, just because of the nature of the complicated issues that I think town meeting still deals with them fairly responsibly and rationally, although of course I, as moderator, never let my feelings interfere with my judgment about those things.
And one final question before I yield here is, how frequently does your finance committee meet?
It meets probably 30 to 35 regular meetings, mostly concentrated obviously in the periods prior to the annual and fall town meeting. There are subcommittee meetings in addition to that. And all in all, between the advisory committee meetings and their responsibilities outside of the meetings and in writing up their views and reports, it's a daunting commitment, and it's one that makes it very difficult. In our town meeting, the moderator appoints all advisory committee members, and I had a lot of trouble finding people that were willing to make that kind of commitment, who could bring talent and certain needed expertise to the committee. I did pretty well at it, but it was always a slog, and the trying to get somebody who's got relevant expertise, who's got a family and a profession to commit to the kinds of hours that our advisory committee has to spend is really was a difficult problem.
Thank you.
Mr. Gadsby, 2 questions on the finance committee. In Plymouth, we're exploring the idea of having the finance committee appointed by more than one person to spread the appointment authority, perhaps have 2 other bodies participate in the appointment. That's the first question. The second question involving the finance committee is, what is their role at town meeting?
Well, as to your first, I'm not sure your first was a question, but I was perfectly happy being the appointing authority, and I would not have wanted to share that role with anybody, particularly the select board, which I view any select board participation in the appointment of the advisory committee as a conflict. On the second question, our advisory committee is called the advisory committee because its main role is to advise town meeting on the articles on most of the articles that come before it. It doesn't. We have a tradition of that started really with the Vietnam protests of having matters come before our town meeting over which town meeting has no control whatsoever. We have condemned every war that has come down the pike since the Vietnam War, including the Vietnam War. And those articles, the advisory committee generally takes a pass on because they're a matter of personal preference rather than examination or an analysis of how they would affect the town government. But the main role is to obviously review and present the town administrator's budget to town meeting and to advise town meeting on any substantive issue that comes before it.
Can I just ask one follow-up question on it, because you piqued my interest? You don't have a nuclear plant in Brookline, which is one of the issues that we've tried from time to bring to town meeting. Do you think the town meeting has a role to play with respect to issues which they might not have any budgetary authority over, or can't really pass a binding vote as to, but let the community be heard through the town meeting members?
Well, I'll answer that by giving you a recent example of town meeting has no control over the type of construction that new buildings have to adhere to. But there's a huge move afoot in progressive communities like ours to implement various kinds of ecological bring ecological factors to bear on new construction. And we tried to have a bylaw. We passed a bylaw to relating to energy, use of energy in new buildings. It was shot down by the Attorney General on the theory that because it was state law preempted it. We've now redone it and put it forward as a home rule amendment, which is just in the process of being heard. And so I think town meeting does, in certain issues that are the burning issues of the day, town meeting can play a role, and that's an example of how our town meeting has.
Other questions? Mr. Pizer.
Mr. Gadsby, I'm fascinated your discussion of the length of town meeting. In Plymouth, some of the people have complained that our town meeting is too short rather than too long, that we don't delve into the issues sufficiently. Do you think that the length of the discussion affects the outcome of the articles?
I don't really have a sense of that. The more complex the article, the longer the discussion is likely to take, and the longer the moderator is likely to tolerate presentations before allowing a motion for the question. So, and as you know, society and our issues get more complicated, the discussions get more lengthy and complex. I don't, I don't think it affects the outcome. The outcome isn't a function of how long you debate. Let me say that for many years, I was proud of our record of 2 or 3 sessions per town meeting, because many representative town meetings went on for, a dozen or 15. I mean, that was one of the problems in Framingham. One of the reasons that there was so much impetus toward converting to a city is that their town meetings went for 12 or 15 sessions. I always thought that was a problem with how the moderator ran things, but every town meeting is different. As Steve will tell you, there are as many different ways of going about governing through your town meeting as there are town meetings in Massachusetts.
Well, it's not unusual in Plymouth to have a long discussion and a result of 104 to 10 in the outcome. Is that similar to Brookline?
Well, it depends. I mean, we have close votes. We have close votes on huge issues. We have surprisingly overwhelming votes on issues that I used to think would result in a much closer vote. But I don't think it doesn't correlate with the length of the debate, is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you very much.
Betsy Hall.
Yes, 2 things. I don't know if this will work for everybody else, but my computer lets me hit the space button and unmute me. And as soon as I let go of the space button, I'm muted again. So that's a lot easier for me now than reaching up to the top of the computer and trying to unmute myself and then mute myself. So I don't know if that'll work for everybody else, but if you press on your space bar, now as soon as I let go of my space bar, I'll be muted again.
Be sure to tell you, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me now?
No, if we can't. We'll let
Oh,
you-
yes. Yeah, I gotta hold the space bar down so you can hear me. So I'd like to ask Mr. Gadsby again, thank you for all of the information that you've given us. The idea of term limits came up. Do you have term limits for select board, and what is your opinion about select board term limits?
We don't. I think as long as our select board is elected on a staggered basis for 3-year term with 3-year terms, and if somebody can endure being a select board member for a long time and the electorate continues to elect them, I say so be it. I certainly don't, I think term limits have a application in places like the Supreme Court, but they don't, my view, in New England towns.
I have another question.
Yep.
Special town meetings. I think it says in your comments that you have approximately 1 special town meeting per year.
Well, we have our regular fall town meeting is a special town meeting because it's not the annual town meeting. And that's has a regular long agenda and used to run for 3, now runs for 6 or so, 4 to 6 sessions. We have special town meetings other than those 2 regular meetings when there's a particular issue that needs to be dealt with and can't, for one reason or another, wait until the next scheduled regular town meeting.
So does that happen very often that you have a special town meeting? I mean, extra, let's say call it an extra town meeting.
I'd say once a year at this
Once a year.
point. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Frank Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Gadsby. You had been talking about earlier that you do see a role for town meeting to espouse a support for a cultural issue, opposition to war, things like that. One of the things I noted, you don't have a specific charter, but you have a town regulations. I don't know what to call it specifically, but a large document. And within that, you also have statements on inclusivity, on the role of women in society and things like that. So that's a similar thing that that happens at town meeting. What's your feeling about the inclusion of those kinds of statements within what, in your case, by any other name, I think is your charter?
Well, once upon a time, we had a quite eminent moderator, one of my predecessors, who in fact was one of the authors of Town Meeting Time, which is the parliamentary book that most town meetings follow these days. And in the late 60s and early 70s, when the Vietnam War was raging, there were several attempts to have town meeting take a position on the war, and my predecessor would not allow it, and he was essentially run out of town or run out of his office as a result of not permitting that debate to go forward at town meeting. That's a function, I think, of the kind of town that Brookline is. It takes an extremely active interest in social and international issues that people think they can ought to be debated at town meeting, and they do. And that has become, since none of my predecessors' successors wanted to be thrown out of office as a result of limiting debate, that has become a tradition in Brookline, that we debate those issues.
And include them in your charter?
No. Just they're in the warrant. There's nothing in the charter about being against wars.
But there are in your charter things about women's role in society and inclusivity and things like that. And you don't normally find those in a lot of charters.
Well, I'm not really aware of what you're referring to, but that's interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, David Peck.
Yeah, I want to come back to, you said that in terms of motions that were not financial were 48 hours before the town meeting, but financial ones were 5 days or 5 calendar days or 5 business days. Is that in the charter or is that in your kind of town meeting book?
That's in the town meeting handbook that, and those rules have changed recently because for one reason or another, and partly in response to the fact that we're conducting virtual meetings these days. So that's a good example of how the moderator can adjust the rules of the procedural rules to conform to current events. Just amend the handbook.
Okay.
That easy.
I have questions on how your town meeting operates at the grassroots level. You have 17 precincts, which interestingly is the same number that we now have in Plymouth with the redistricting. And yet we have half as many town meeting members, which means because we have 9, you must have close to 20 town meeting members per precinct.
No, 15.
15?
Yep.
Do they organize among themselves? So there's a chairman of a precinct?
Not formally. As I said, there are many precincts have informal meetings of the town meeting members to discuss warrant articles. But the extent to which that is exists in a precinct varies widely. There are some precincts that have none of that sort of thing goes on, but there's no organization among town meeting members other than these informal precinct meetings.
We've taken it to a higher level a bit because we have chairs of the various precincts that form a committee of their own called the precinct chairs. And we've been looking at what kind of powers they should have. But one issue that is before us frequently is the ability of the town to react quickly to opportunities that are presented when you only have 2 town meetings per year. Has this been an issue in Brookline, and how is it handled legislatively?
Well, we have, the select board can call a special town meeting to handle something that comes up that requires action before that can't wait around for the next scheduled meeting.
And is that the 30 days notice, basically? I think
Yeah,
our it says 30 days.
actually, the select board can reduce it to as little as 14 days. And the warrant notice period can be as little as 7 days. That's not a happy state of affairs because it doesn't really give the deliberative bodies, either the select board or the advisory committee or the planning board, to the extent that they involve the planning board, doesn't give them time to really do a good job in researching and advising town meeting. But that's that's a possibility and certainly available in case of an emergency.
Right. David?
I noticed in your remark or your written thing that the planning board is appointed, not elected.
Yes.
So what committees or what boards are elected? So the select board and the town meeting and the moderator, but any others that are elected?
Yeah, the school committee and the library trustees are elected, and the town clerk. That's it.
Right.
Most other standing committees, as I said, are appointed by the select board.
Okay, thank you.
We have a requirement of preparation before town meeting that the town meeting members should receive 21 days the advisory and finance committee's report. I noticed you said 14 days. Does that give your town meeting members enough time to get prepped on these issues and be fully prepared by town meeting, you think?
Well, it should. It should, but town meeting members are many are diligent and many are not. And I can't say that they all come trooping into town meeting fully prepared to understand what's going to come before them. That's certainly not the case. They're human beings.
Mhm. Questions, Larry Pizer? Larry, you're not being heard.
As the first appointed town clerk of Plymouth, I understand that the question of whether a clerk should be appointed or elected, I think has to do with the independence of the position, especially since the clerk runs elections. Has there been a discussion in Brookline about whether or not the clerk should be appointed instead of elected?
More than a discussion. There was an article on the warrant at the last annual town meeting to change the clerk position from a elected to an appointed position. And it, despite the fact that our long-term town clerk, whose tenure was as long as mine as moderator, was in favor of the change, it was defeated at town meeting.
Really?
For,
Okay.
among other reasons, the one you cite.
Thank you.
A couple of questions just on procedure. At town meeting, do you limit the number of times a town meeting member can speak? And with a 255, it'll take you quite a while to let everybody speak, but can one person speak 2 or 3 times?
Well, that's more a function of when debate is terminated than it is moderator's choice. As moderator, I would not let anybody speak a second time until everybody who had not spoken had an opportunity to speak. And I think that's the fair way to do it.
Mhm. Other questions? Okay, looks like we've exhausted our questions to you. We thank you very much. We will continue to deliberate.
Well, thank
Great.
you. And
Mr. Cohan has a question. Bill Cohan.
I had a quick question. I think that you might have talked about this. Do you have caucuses in your town?
well, we have caucuses to fill vacant town meeting seats, but that's it.
So you don't take up the warrant in a caucus in a neighborhood. You're not having neighborhood caucuses like you're not. You only caucus to nominate someone to fill a vacancy at town meeting, and then go to town meeting and reserve all your debate and discussion at town meeting.
Well, as I tried to get across, many precincts have meetings of town meeting members to discuss the warrant before
Okay.
town meeting, and we have a very active League of Women Voters that sponsors 2 or 3 sessions, pre-town meeting sessions, in which warrant articles are discussed by the interested parties.
Okay. And then your warrants are not reserved for any subject matter. You could have both financial and other zoning articles. Everything's all pushed together in your spring and your fall. You don't segregate or try to block articles of a certain nature to a certain town meeting.
Well, historically, we tried to limit regulatory articles to the fall meeting and financial articles to the spring meeting, but that has fallen by the wayside. And essentially, each of the 2 major meetings, the spectrum of issues is limitless.
And in the last 5 years, how many special town meetings have you had?
Well, other than the regular fall special town meeting, I think 4, something like that. It's about 1 a year.
And you were mentioning that you were getting 35 to 40 articles a town meeting. And it's only grown year to year in terms of the magnitude of articles that you are entertaining and debating. So
I think the number of articles has not grown appreciably. The complexity of the issues involved in the articles has increased substantially.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gadsby.
Just guess one more question. With all these committees, you said you had a great number of committees that function in between town meetings and kind of participate in the government day to day. How many volunteers would you say are spread among these committees?
Oh, I've never counted them, but there are 30 or 40 committees, and they generally have 5 or 6 members, and usually half of them will be town meeting members and half will not be. I mean, that's a sort of typical configuration. I should mention one other thing. We have a committee called the Committee of Town Organization and Structure that's appointed by the moderator. And I always appointed very experienced ex-former select board members and the like, that deals exclusively with and evaluates and advises town meeting on articles that have to do with the structure of town government. And that's a very helpful, I think, in Brookline anyway, a very helpful addition to our governing structure.
Do you have any procedure for legislative oversight to follow up articles that have passed a town meeting to see what's actually happening to them?
Yeah, there's the select board is the town administrator is supposed to report at each town meeting the status of home rule amendments that have been sent to the legislature. Not necessarily every, the report doesn't follow up on all action taken by town meeting. That's pretty much a matter of there are enough interested parties and something that requires some sort of affirmative action, so that the administration is not going to get away with doing nothing on an issue that town meeting has adopted.
Frank, thank you. Frank.
Could I follow up on the committee of town organizations you mentioned and what their role is? That intrigues me, and I wondered if you could give a specific example of how and where they might speak out.
Well, sure. We converted from a executive secretary to a town administrator about 20 or 30 years ago, and the CTOS had a big role in evaluating that change and in recommending the parameters for the new position of town administrator. And any change in the structure of town governance is going to get the same treatment, and they're very diligent and very smart and very experienced.
We just went through hiring a new town manager, and with the CTOS, as you referred to it,
No.
in any
No.
way weigh in on this?
No, they don't participate in the appointing process at all.
I meant the process. Comment on the process.
Not really. It's, in our town, for an important position like town administrator, the select board will often hire a consultant to help it. In fact, we have a longtime town administrator who's resigning, whose term, who's not going to renew his contract, which expires next September. The select board is hiring a consultant to guide them in appointing a new one, and will probably appoint a screening committee to help sort through resumes and interview and perform that kind of function. Where we have a town council and town administrator vacancies right now, and there will be screening committees appointed by the select board for each.
Can I ask two more questions? Is your town council outside firm or is it inside council? And the second question, is there a conscious reason you call your person a town administrator rather than a town manager?
Nope. I have no idea what the distinction would be, if any. Our town council is in-house, and we have usually 4 or 5 in-house lawyers, as befits a town with a kind of complex makeup and issues and legal issues that our town has to face.
Really, that's really interesting. You have a law department for the town of Brookline, basically.
Yep.
Wow. David Malaguti.
Bill, if I could, Mr. Gadsby, what would be approximately your legal budget with your 4 or 5 in-house counsel?
Maybe it's 6 figures, high 6 figures, but that includes a lot of other things like settlement accounts and so forth. So I just don't have those numbers. I can get them for you if you want.
No, I'm just curious because I was on the board of selectmen many years ago that voted to go with Copeland and Page because of their many different, their lawyers had many different specialties. And I was, very supportive of that back then. And I think it's interesting that you have 4 or 5 in-house people, but I just wanted the comparison of the 2 legal budgets.
Well, I can get you that number. We, in addition to our our town council staff, we do hire special labor counsel and hire outside counsel we have lots of litigation.
Yeah, I kind of know that feeling. If
Yeah.
it's not much trouble, because I know you're not in that position anymore, but if you could have your counterpart just send down to our secretary, Michelle Turner, last year's legal figure, if you would.
Sure. It's published, I think, but I can make life easier for you, and I'll have it sent down to you.
Thank you so much.
And along with a breakdown.
Thank you so much.
Very good. Any, Larry Pfizer?
Residence requirement. At one point, your finance director and our town manager were married. And had there been a residence requirement, I think that would have been a vicious attack on the sacrament of marriage. Is there any pressure on people in Brookline to actually, employees of Brookline to live in the town?
Well, the answer is absolutely not. And the main reason, I suppose, is that town employees rarely have the wherewithal to afford to live in Brookline. It's a very expensive place to live.
Yep. Thank you.
Very good. Any other questions from commissioners? Well, this has been terrific, Mr. Gadsby, the insights you've given us, and with quite candid comments, and lots of stuff here to think about. I appreciate it.
Well, I hope it's been helpful, and thank you very much. It's been very interesting for me.
Good. We hope to
Thanks,
talk
Bill.
to you again.
Thank you.
So the next item on our agenda, yes, hands are up, David Peck.
I'm waving goodbye and thanking him.
Okay, we're waving. All right, good. Thank you.
Me then.
Thank you very much. David, did you want to say something?
Yes, I'm very impressed with the prior speaker. I think his experience and his knowledge is tremendous. I just wanted to interject something now, just so I don't get a senior moment. I don't remember if it was during my first tenure of 1981 to 1990 or the second tenure from 98 to 2010. But there was a year we had 4 special town meetings. I don't remember which year it was, but we very well could have special town meetings, not as intricate and as involved as the annual or the fall annual, but to take up items that have to be dealt with in a timely fashion. The second point I want to bring up is we discussed, well, it was discussed tonight about elected or appointed, and I'm just going to use the town clerk position, but it could be the town treasurer, it could be not treasurer anymore, finance director. When you appoint, you can have a specific job description with requirements. When you elect, a lot of times it becomes a personality contest. So, the idea of having elections for all the positions, sometimes it's detrimental because you can't say you cannot run for this position unless you have a CPA degree. I don't believe Massachusetts law allows that. So I think it's beneficial to have appointed positions with the necessary requirements. Thank you.
Good. Betsy?
Yes, I'd like to speak to the idea of extra town meetings. The last meeting we had, Wrestling talked a lot about the library and the library roof. And as I was thinking about his comments, I was thinking about the fact that as soon as the selectmen realized that their estimate for fixing the roof was too small, they could have immediately asked for a town meeting just on that one issue. We already had a lot of education about that. And then the second time, but immediately town meeting did vote when it was brought to our attention the following town meeting. And then again, it came back to us. There still was not enough money. Again, the select board, I believe, failed to call a special town meeting. I think it was neither time was it a failure of town meeting. Town meeting actually did agree to spend the amount of money needed to fix that roof and whatever other repairs needed to be done because the roof was neglected for so long. But I don't think that was a failure of town meeting. I think town meeting did what it was supposed to do, and the select board might have called a special town meeting and had that situation under control a lot sooner.
Actually, this has been the practice for the last recent years, where a tough issue was taken up at town meeting, and we had another town meeting right away to try to do a do-over on a single issue. So it has become more common, I'd say, in the last 2 years. Going that route.
And I regret that they didn't do that with the library. Bring forward a town meeting to deal with that one issue.
Right. I have a comment. So let's shift gears and consider the council form of government. And we thank David Peck has done some really good work here to present to us an outline of what a town council would look like for Plymouth. And a second paper where he compares town meeting with a town council. And I'd say we have time here now to really discuss this. So let's, David, you want to make some?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and fellow commissioners. I thought that it would, for discussion purposes, it's appropriate to look at both documents. The document comparing a town meeting to a council was triggered in part, Mr. Chairman, by one of your remarks recently that you had heard that or understood a major difference between a council and a town meeting was the councils met more frequently. And I know there's a lot more substantive differences between them. So I thought the one sheet was just kind of a bullet point, off the top of my head for discussion purposes, the difference between a Plymouth town meeting and a theoretical council. So I'd like to just kind of briefly, people have it in front of them, but just briefly touch base on those differences. Hearing from the Brookline moderator was interesting, including the fact that there's motions afoot to create a commission because the life has gotten more complex. But with that sheet, just briefly, I'll just kind of hit each bullet. With 18 precincts, we're heading toward 162 members, unless this commission changes members per precinct, where a council, I'm proposing for discussion a 13-member council, 9 from districts, 4 at large, and that would be clearly much smaller, representative of districts. We've noticed recently there's many seats are uncontested, or I would say barely contested, which is the times when 3 town meeting members run for the 3 openings. It would be nice to have more competition. With a council, fewer seats means much more competition. Our town meeting meets twice a year, sometimes 3, as we've talked about. A town council meets twice a month for 10 months a year and maybe once in the summer. So they meet 22 times a year. We deliberate, and I'm being generous here, sometimes 12 hours, 6 hours per Saturday, twice a year. Maybe it becomes 18 if there's 3, where a town council would deliberate 2 to 3 hours per session, as you're looking at 44 to 66 hours of deliberation. A town meeting right now deliberates 1 time per article. A town council, by their bylaws and charter, deliberates a minimum of 2 times per article, with at least 2 weeks between for consideration. Town meeting, town employees can be town meeting members. Town council, the ones I've studied, town employees cannot be counselors. Town meeting, the finance committee is appointed by one person, the moderator. The finance and advisory committee is appointed by the council in a council form. The school committee in our town is fully elected and they're independent from the select board. The councils I've studied frequently have the council president as a voting member of the school committee, providing more potential integration between the two elected boards and review of finance. Our select board, a 5-member select board with 4 votes required to hire and fire. A larger council with a 2/3 majority gets more people involved to make those decisions, which I think more people to either put the brakes or the gasoline on it. Select board are elected at large, and council elections, by being based on their district or their ward, could be less expensive for people running for the council. I understand that running for a selectman in this town can cost $20,000 to $30,000. Running for a council position district might become more affordable and less of a burden. So I mentioned that, and then district-wide elections. And this actually was the thing that first got me started in this interest in the charter, is our town, the elections by state legislature are required to happen in the spring. Council elections can happen in November with much larger turnout. So that's kind of just a high-level comparison, which are substantive, I believe. And secondly, my second sheet was sort of coming up with a suggested council open to discussion on each of the items. I proposed a 13-member council with 2 people from, 2 precincts combined into a district. So a total of 13, 9 from representing different parts of town, 4 at large. I put in here how we would deal with growing census, but always keep it as an odd number and keep it 13. Council meets between September and June. So with those 22 meetings, council elects a council president and vice president with a 1-year term. The council does almost all the appointments. And then what I threw out for, especially for commentary, is the town would elect the school committee, but would include the council president as a voting member. And I am proposing for discussion that conservation is so important to this town, our open space, our aquifer, our relationship to the bay and to, I'm thinking of the trees and the turtles and everything. We're a very special place. I suggested that the conservation committee, and conservation is so important, that may be worth considering for voting election. So respectfully submitted to my fellow commissioners here for discussion, because throughout all these meetings, I still believe intellectually and study that, like we heard from our guest, that life is very complex and getting more complex and needs more frequent meetings, competitive elections, and full accountability in the council. Again, thank you for your time, folks.
Thank you, David. I think time has come for this commission now to start making our statements, our arguments. I think we've got to, let's face it, gentlemen and ladies, we're going to have to take a position, and we're more than a third of the way through the process. So I think we've really got to start debating the pluses and minuses about what we've been hearing before the commission. Would anybody, and David does very kindly put this on the table, would anybody like to start some good, hard debate? So I saw Betsy's hand go up first, followed by Larry, and then David Malaguti. Go ahead, Betsy.
Thank you, David. I just want you to know that under what I think I see in your suggestions, I would not ever be eligible to run for anything in Plymouth because I was a guidance counselor here. So I don't know if that was your intent, but maybe I misunderstood.
You misunderstood. It's active town employees only.
Well, it says here, it says if you ever work for the town of Plymouth. So maybe I misunderstood it, but I'll read it again.
Yeah.
But I would like to know the names of the towns that have this form of government that you are espousing, that you consider to be in better shape than Plymouth, maybe a better place to live than Plymouth, and why they're a better, why has their council form of government made them a better place than Plymouth, a better government than Plymouth, or a better run place than Plymouth, however you want to frame it?
Well, yeah, I would just say, I'm hoping that when we have our guests from the council forum, but that's partly subjective. You know, certainly what I've studied, Watertown has a very progressive town council. If those of us have heard from Anatol Zuckerman about solar panels on the roof, know very well that he's modeled his after Watertown. So Watertown is a progressive commitment to, solar and water stuff. And I consider the fact that in several of them, but especially Watertown, the council president is a voting member of the school committee. And I think that kind of integration makes life better. But ultimately, I would say, my commitment to putting this on the table is, I just think, given the complexity and our size, we're now the largest in the town, in the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth itself recommends that you move from open town meeting to representative town meeting to this kind of structure. You just see it in mass municipal and even the government supplied things. So I don't know how to defend, say, okay, it's better in Barnstable or it's better in Watertown, but it clearly provides more deliberation and potential quick turnaround for deliberation and action.
I'd like to just jump in just because you mentioned Watertown. And I lived in Watertown for 3 years, and I was in law school, and I was a town meeting member during that period of time, and I got to know the Watertown town government very well. And I think I've told this story before, but it was the most political, employee dominated town meeting that you could even write down on a piece of paper. It was absolutely incredible. You couldn't get near a door without people stuffing things, town employees stuffing things in your hand. The only way I got elected to town meeting was to prepare a little card that said I don't depend on the town for my income. And there were enough people that wanted somebody to be a town meeting member, wasn't an employee. But when I left Watertown, I knew their town meeting was in a very, very sad shape, and the people thought it was a total political operation. And sure enough, within a few years, they lost their town meeting, and now they have a council. So the history of how this council formed, I'm going to be very interested to hear that. The other thing, David, I want to say is, you talk about 13 members, 13 people in the town of Plymouth appointing all these boards and everything. So, and everybody else checks out. All these 300 or 400 volunteers that work on town committees in Plymouth are told basically, go home, you've done your job. We now have a 13-member full-time town council, that's going to meet, it's going to take care of things. So we're going to lose hundreds and hundreds of volunteers in Plymouth, like in Brookline, that care enough about their government to actually take part in it. I just think it would be a sad story, but that's just a comment. And I think Mr. Pizer,
I don't think other committees go away. I'm just, again, proposing this for discussion,
right,
because in theory, the appointing authority also brings accountability to them. So it goes both ways. The planning board could remain elected. So others could be potentially elected. But I put this out because, one hears over and over again, transparency and accountability, and the accountability would reside in a council.
Larry Pizer.
I think that one of the things that the 9 of us are going to have to do is decide on very basic issues. What is the purpose of government? And I think that the paper that we got from Brookline got into that, where they said that there is a tension between democracy on the one hand and efficiency on the other hand. And, I think that David's effort does very well in setting us on that issue, even if he and I are going to end up on different sides of the decision. David, first question. I'm believing that running for town meeting is reasonably inexpensive. I certainly hope so, because about 5 hours ago, I walked over to town hall and put my papers in as a town meeting member, and don't expect to spend anything running for a town meeting. What do you think the expense of running even for a district office would be?
David,
I would assume it's going to be not much different than running in your, I see enough signs and flyers and postcards from some town meeting members when they're running, and whatever that cost is, $500, $800, it's not 20 or 30,000. I think, my argument, without putting individual dollars to it, is that running at large in this town the last few years has gotten more and more expensive.
Quite agreed. And I think that the question of even $500 or $1,000 is a limiting factor with a lot of people running for town meeting. The second matter is every time we talk about conflict of interest I'm looking around, I guess there's only one person I'm looking at. It might be argued that town employees have a conflict of interest. It might be argued that attorneys have a conflict of interest. It's certainly the case that realtors have a conflict of interest running for the town. So as we go into conflict of interest, it seems to me that sometimes I have facetiously referred to the Nebraska rule, which is that the only people who can run for town meeting are citizens of the state of Nebraska, because they might not have a conflict of interest within Plymouth. But I think even they do, because they would drive on our streets and have a conflict. So I'd be careful. I'm rather concerned with pushing conflict of interest too far. Thank you.
thank you.
Well, I'd just say, I don't think it's pushing it too far, because our current charter has pretty good conflict of interest statute and language, sometimes not always abided by town meeting members. But the thing I'm talking about, and this is in Amherst and I don't know, Watertown and Barnstable, and to come back to Betsy's thing, it just said, current town employees cannot be also a counselor. And then for 12 months after they have left counselorship, but then they're allowed to go back to their job and work for the town. So there's no lifetime precluding town people.
But there's limiting of their privileges of citizenship. I mean, you're not even saying that they can't vote on their own salary. You're saying they can't be even part of that part of the legislative branch of town government.
Correct. That is what this draft and other councils, I'm not making up this out of whole cloth, that exists elsewhere in the state.
Well, other towns are lesser than Plymouth. So, I mean, I think that what we're really dealing with is what is the best avenue for Plymouth? That's what we need to consider.
Correct.
Betsy,
Yes, I'm interested in the number 13 council members. Did you want to talk? I'm sorry, I've already spoken. Did you have your hand up?
no,
Okay.
no, this one-
13 members. I really don't understand why we can't have 13 members of our select board. If we can have 13 council members, if a lot of companies have 13, 15 people on their boards. I don't understand limiting our select board to 5 people. So let's suppose that the decision is not to go forward with a council. Let's go forward with select board and town meeting. I don't understand people's objection, and I know I need someone to explain it to me because I'm sure I'm missing a point. But I don't understand why we can't have 13 select board members who bring all different forms of expertise to the select board. So elected select board. So maybe someone can explain to me what the objection is to 13 select board members.
Wrestling. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is why David brought all this up. I think, you know, we can argue the point of, you know, being employed by the town or not, but I think that to Betsy's point, what's the difference between having 13 select boards and having 13 council? No difference. It's what you call it. And it's the form of government. I would be totally against raising the select board to 13. One of the points that I think everybody on this commission has made is we've got to get a handle on our government. And we've all talked about, you know, that FinCom has to take a different role. We have to limit that role. And we've talked about meeting more often, and we've talked about having one of the things I really liked about David's point was that there was a lot of ad hoc members of the council in the school board and other boards. I think that's where we lose some of our government is that, you know, I look at COPC as really forming a council. You know, they've started to get robust, and they've started to look at different articles, and they started to, you know, really flex their muscles. And I think that, you know, Bill, you were one of the people who created that chair of the chairs. That, you know, I think what you meant is to have this involved body that was involved throughout the year in between town meetings. And I really see that happening. And I see, you know, one of my deepest concerns right now is through the redistricting, our COPC is going to look completely different, as is our town meeting. And I really have concerns that they're not going to keep doing what I want them to do. But I think that, you know, David's point here is that this is one form of what we need to look at. You know, the little minutia stuff of whether they're you know, employees or not, you know, that's, you know, points that we should work out. But I really think that this is something that we should look at. And I think that, you know, going to 13 members, you know, yeah, you could make 13 selectmen, but, you know, you basically got a council at that point. And I think it's more members, just my 2 cents. And I just think that, you know, we should really look at this and as an option.
Right. Other comment? Frank? Frank?
I just wanted to point out Catherine Holmes. I found it intriguing at the Times. Catherine Holmes, I think she's presently the chair of the CO of the precinct chairs. She advocated for, I believe, a 7 or 9 member board of select persons, with the notion that I thought was a good one, that they would be more representative of areas of town, that perhaps with 18 precincts or so, there'd be 9 select persons. And so they would bring that representative perspective. So I think the difference, I think it could be, and I was intrigued by that. I had never entertained that. But the difference between 9 select persons represented that way and 13 counselors is a total form of different government, where those 13 are the soul. They appoint everyone, potentially in a lot of situations, they appoint everyone. They appoint the various committees, the planning board and others. And I find that to be, for me, the least appealing aspect of a council form of government. I think it's resting all the eggs in one basket. And then going back to this notion of whether they're contested or not contested, councilors versus town meeting members. I think those 13 councilors would be hotly contested. And I think they could be easily influenced by money that takes to get you elected and get that notoriety. And therefore moneyed interests, as apart from the legislative form of government we have, which has a representative and an executive, moneyed interests would easily play eventually a larger role in what our town decides for its future. And I'm very wary of that. That's
I think money also plays a role in the election of selectmen. So,
oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. That's why I was saying that the 9 intrigues me. And but then they're buffered by the legislative branch and potentially a more empowered council of precinct chairs, which I envision having a kind being able to be that emergency valve as well, maybe giving them powers in emergency situations to make things happen. But money is always a question to me. What it takes to get elected now to the select board is, I think, a bit preposterous. And maybe we could put some restrictions on that. I guess you can. I guess that's unconstitutional. Anyway, let's keep the.
David Malaguti, then Bill Cohen.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, I never spent anywhere close to that amount of money in 8 elections. Several things. When we are talking conflict of interest, it would seem to me that what we have now, as a result of your efforts, Bill, with the electronic voting, it would be easy to see if in fact there was somebody in conflict. Getting back to the same conflict issue, on the Board of Selectmen, 2 come to mind. I served with Butch Machado and I served with Sean Page, and both of them were very, very conscientious and recused themselves anytime there was any kind of an issue that could be, directly connected to a union type issue, a wage issue, so forth and so on. So I hold them both in high esteem. They were very, very good about that. Also, I would like to ask Larry, I remember at one point we had a special election. I don't remember who it was for, but it was to fill a vacancy on the Board of Selectmen. We had it in the fall, and we had to have 2 check-ins and checkouts and 2 completely different ballots. One was the state and federal ballot, and one was the local ballot. If we went to a council form of government, do the election rules require that same thing to happen? Or when you become a council, you can be on the same ballot as the state and the federal?
No, because state law precludes town elections on state election day. So they're restricted to odd years where state elections are in even numbered years. So no, that would not normally be a circumstance. It only worked with a special election which occurred on that day, but you could not hold the entire town election or city election if we became a city on the day that the state election was held.
Thank you.
Bill Cohen?
David, couple of things. It's been mentioned before, and I've been trying to track it down in terms of the substantive nature around this statement that the state is requiring towns of a certain population to move to council mayor.
it is, I would say it's not required, it's recommended.
Recommended.
Yeah.
Recommended. Yeah.
It's not required.
Where is this coming from? I mean, it's been mentioned, and I'm trying to see where that information has generated. Could someone point me to where that is coming from? So that was my first question. Okay. Second was, And I'll probably do some more research on it too, David. I'm not asking for you to divulge that now. I think it's just going to require us to kind of track it down. It's been mentioned a couple of times, and it comes from, an association of council forms of government. It always seems to be coming from somewhere where there might not be, there might be some reason for it. But this idea that you had on the Conservation Commission being elected, sometimes I worry about like the planning board being appointed or the zoning board being is currently appointed. You and I both serve on that planning board, and I was thinking about this recently, that there's a group of people on that planning board that have spent enough time to know each other well enough in the bylaws and the petitioners that they work well together, and different opinions are sought out. I worry about the idea that if you were to elect a Concom, what happens if you had pro-developers who were funding candidates and giving money to candidates to affect the Conservation Commission? I do worry about that the money that you start to introduce to the Conservation Commission and the candidates and running, how would that sort itself out? Have you thought of that? I go back and forth, and I see the benefits of appointing like a ZBA or a Concom, and then I worry about some of the big money coming into Concom and ZBA and what that might mean. I know I've been more concerned with my planning board, which is elected, than is that this appointed Concom and ZBA. I think they at times, hold a standard that you don't naturally see on the influence of money and campaigning.
It's interesting that those two boards are appointed, because those are two adjudicatory boards.
Yeah.
I think it's perfectly appropriate that they be appointed and not elected.
Right. No, I was asking David. David had mentioned this idea of Concom, that he thought that it was in this scenario that it was such important substantive matter for the town that we should have Concom elected. I wanted to know if he had any other thoughts on that, David.
No, I put in my cover note, I'm absolutely two minds, but the reason I put it on here for discussion is I think conservation issues, open space, aquifer, our coastline, so many things are so important that has to be built into our charter. And the possibility of it being elected, I understand the influence of money, but the influence of money is there in any board that makes decisions,
Right.
So I'm at 50% on this particular one, but the main purpose to say conservation issues are important in this town, and I want them to be so kind of empowered and recognized in our charter.
Okay. And my third question that I thought about as David was speaking, and thought maybe he could speak a little bit more to it, and that is this question about how much money we're spending right now on these races compared to what we might be spending in a more consolidated form of government. And you're saying 10, 20 to 30,000. I've worked on a number of campaigns in Plymouth to work on questions and candidates townwide. And I wouldn't say that is a number that I've seen. That's kind of getting up towards this. That's not what I've seen. Maybe it's because I've worked on campaigns that haven't succeeded. I should have had more money. And when I'm on a campaign, I'm always looking for more money, but I haven't reached that where that is the norm. I think we're south of that. The average would have to look at the last 5 years, the average selectman's race, what that might be a good exercise. I'll look into it, David. Unless you have already done some research there, it'd be kind of interesting to see what the average selectman's race.
No, I will say, I won't say it's anecdotal. I remember a couple of years ago hearing number of 12 to 15. Right. But I've also from at least one unsuccessful candidate heard the number 20 to 30. You know, that it's been going up. It's been, you know, if you look at the mailers that we're getting, you know, multiple ones, you know, if I'm wrong, if that's an outlier and it's only 12 to 15, that's still too much. That's still a burden to an individual who wants to run to be the select board.
Right.
Or a town lead.
I do believe though, with a town of 60, 70,000 people, that it is going to cost some sort of, amount of money to communicate with them, whether you're using the internet, whether you're using direct mail, or whether you're using radio, you know, or hopefully as much free media as you possibly can. The political process does require some sort of investment in those activities. And so I just want to put them in perspective in terms of what we're actually doing, that the turnout in an election is a direct result of the investment that's being made in an election cycle to get information out about a candidate. So information is vital to turnout. I think that regardless of what campaign you're on, I've always said this, if there's a lot of people running and there are a lot of people doing mailings, regardless of what issue might be being promoted with one individual mailing, it does spawn this thing like, wow, look, there's an election, I got to get out to vote. So I do feel like, you know, the League of Women Voters, they'll put up a banner, they'll spend money and time. The state agencies that try to get the word out about elections and they spend money. We can't get around the fact that it does require some expenditure to get information out. I think what I'd like to do, I'll try to see if I can get some numbers to see, David, what a 5-year election cycle has looked like in terms of the escalation of the average cost of a selectman's race, you know, or planning board, something like that.
I think it'd be nice to know all the major elective races.
Yeah.
So,
but I know that
committee, planning board.
You are right though, that the select board is probably the most expensive, followed by planning and then school. I've worked in all three, and you're definitely right. If you're going to end up spending more, it would be around the selectmen's race than it is planning and then school. Thank you very much.
Betsy Hall.
Hi, I just wanted to say that to run for a mayor, I believe in Braintree, it's treasure chest is well over 100,000, maybe 150. I can look it up. Haven't had time right now, but to run for a mayor in any of the mayor towns is wildly expensive compared to any of our selectmen, our council members, you know, council members running.
Yeah.
So that's a huge input.
Yeah.
But I also wanted,
Which is why the word mayor does not appear in anything I write.
I also wanted to say that when I became involved with town meeting, at the time, I believe it was like 22 years ago, there was a big push for mayor in Plymouth. And what I came to recognize, David, is something that you have referred to a lot, and that is that town meeting right now is the only group that can change our zoning. And if a small group of people could actually change our zoning so that much more development could happen very quickly, which has happened in other towns that did go to a mayor form of government. A lot of development happened very quickly. I would not be in favor of that. So whatever form of government we come up with, I want to find a way to protect our zoning so that we can protect our water, our forests, etc.
David Malagui.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. First of all, before I forget it, like I say, senior moments. I do not see any advantage to increasing the number of selectmen dramatically. From a policymaking standpoint, and from sitting on the board and listening to the various issues through the years, I think, you know, to increase to like 13 or something like that is certainly not necessary. You know, increase 5 to 7. Well, all right, I might go along with that, but anything more than that is counterproductive. And on the question of running a campaign, having been involved in many of them, you can spend what you want to spend, and it's not always depending on what you spend for the end result. A good quality sign costs you anywhere from $15 to $20 a piece. And if you print 300 of them, that's $6,000. If you print 400 of them, and I used to run between 300 and 350, but if you print 400 of them now, that could be $8,000. So you could spend an inordinate amount of money on such things as even signs. And I think you can spend whatever you want, and that's true of any race. Usually you don't see that much money spent on a planning board race, but there's no reason why a candidate couldn't spend that amount of money. So I don't know if we can restrict that. I don't know how you would. It's probably impossible, but I just got to put my 2 cents worth in. Thank you.
Larry Pfizer, and then I think we should take a quick break and go to public comment.
Okay, just quickly to bring in Poli-Sci 101. The select board is part of the executive function of the town. A council, or our present town meeting, is the legislative function. And therefore, the question of whether or not we should have 5, 3, 7, 9, 12 select board members is an interesting one, but I don't think it's related to the question of whether a 13-member council is more representative of Plymouth, or a 162-member town meeting, or a 100-member town meeting. Those are two different functions. And I think that we need to keep our understanding of what is legislative, what is executive. Thank you.
Thank you. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Can I just say one thing?
Let's comment.
Just a quick note to David's comment. In Betsy's comment and a few other comments that Frank made, I have to agree. I think one of the greatest challenges that faces the town of Plymouth is development, is conservation. We are at the 50% point of development. Half of Plymouth is developed, half of Plymouth is undeveloped. And how we develop the rest of Plymouth is going to have a direct result on the cost of services, meaning that how high your taxes will go. So I think there's a lot at stake, and we have to be very careful. I think David brought up some very good points that makes me want to think about how we approach that. But I think that's one of the underlying concerns that we hear in the town of Plymouth, that we've seen a rate of growth that no other town in New England has seen over the last 35 years. And we need to be sensitive to how we approach the zoning bylaws of the town in terms of how the changes. I've always said that one of the greatest things, one of the interesting things in Plymouth is the town of Plymouth and its residents have control of its zoning bylaws. And that is an incredible feat, that the greatest factor that's going to determine the quality of our lives and how high our taxes go is how we use our land. And town meeting has always controlled that. And I've seen articles rush through FinCom and rush through the selectmen, and zoning bylaw changes, rush through the planning board. And then they get close to town meeting, and town meeting really has stepped up to the plate. And this is the one thing that I always gravitate to about the process of democracy. Having a lot of people in the room and looking at something like that, it brings up a very interesting debate on how to proceed. There's numerous examples of where town meeting has stepped in and done something that the other boards and committees were unwilling to do because of their association with the bylaw changes of the town. But thank you very much, David. Those are very good points. I hope that we can further discuss them.
Right.
Thank
This
you.
is just the tip of the iceberg. It's just beginning.
Yeah.
We're gonna have
It's been important discussion, so I'm glad we're kicked it off.
No, I think we'll
To think about
definitely return to it at our next meeting, which is February 7th, and then again on the 14th. But I'd like now to, since we put it on our agenda, to take comments from folks that want to be heard by the commission. We have some waiting, and Michelle will start our public comment. Michelle, would you invite our first resident to speak?
We have no one with their hand up right now. Oh, we just had one. Hold on. Let's see.
Okay,
Kevin Lynch. I'm going to invite him in.
go ahead.
Yes, can you folks hear me?
I hear you, Kevin. Yes.
Yes.
Well, by gosh, I had some trouble over the past number of times trying to get in. And I just kind of actually wanted to check as far as this goes, but Mr. Peck, my concern was that I think a resident was asking for a schematic, not so much a description. So I think speaking from the teacher side, is a schematic is more like a diagram. So that might be helpful. And basically, that would be it. I'd love to go and check my notes and see what else I'd like to say. So I'll just bow out at this point and see if anyone else is out there. If not, maybe I can think of what I wanted to say previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. So, Michelle,
gonna-
do you have it?
Yeah, I'm going to bring in Ken Christofori now.
Okay. And we see you and hear you.
Oh, very good. Yeah, I just want to applaud Mr. Peck. I thought what he brought up is exactly what the board actually, I mean, the commission actually needed. Because I got to tell you, this debate was fantastic. I mean, the points that they brought up and the debate that followed. You know, he mentioned it's more of a hybrid type form, which is great. But it also allows to have, you know, town meeting be involved, either a select board or a council. But I just really want to applaud that. I think this was like one of the best commission meetings that I've heard. I think you guys got a lot done. I think it opens up conversation, which is just what's needed in this town. You know, you can listen to people, you know, they have great intentions from other towns coming speaking about, you know, how their towns are run, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, they're not Plymouth. I mean, you know, I've been in Plymouth forever. You know, Mr. Malagudi's been in Plymouth forever. I like to think Plymouth is unique, to be honest with you. And I think what Mr. Peck has brought up and the conversation that is excellent. And keep up the good works. I think you guys are on the right track. And keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Christopher. I want to say we appreciate the paper that you submitted. It was sent out to all our members for this meeting. Your suggestion of a hybrid form of town government is fascinating, where you have a town manager, you have a council instead of a select board, and you still have town meeting. So it's an interesting combination, and that's within our power to assemble the parts in any way we think makes sense for Plymouth. But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Michelle, do we have anybody else that would like to speak?
Yes, I'm going to bring in Peter Neville now.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Peter.
Good evening. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Wonderful. First, I only have 5 things I'd like to say. First is thank you again for your service to the town. It's incredible. Second, I want to thank you for bringing an excellent speaker from Brookline. And I thought that discussion and your questions really amplified the scope of what you folks are looking at. Just a great presentation. The discussion around Mr. Peck's proposal, I think, was also brilliant, and hopefully opens up the discussion for this charter commission. Fourth, I guess I would ask whether or not this commission has considered publicizing, giving the voters in this town some sense of what you're doing, and either doing that through a press release with the OCM or doing a mailer, perhaps a direct mail. I know that in some of the research we've done, it may cost $7,000 or $8,000 to send a direct mail and a postcard, for instance, to all the voters in town and let them know that you folks are hard at work. And I suggest that perhaps to offer ballast to any of the waves out there or the ships that are thinking that maybe they have a better idea than the Charter Commission. And I hope that you would not be distracted from the important work that you're doing by perhaps other boards, for instance, the Select Board, proposing that there be a referendum vote. I think that that's an end run, and I'll go on the record as saying that. And I hope that, I really wish there was somehow another force or another body that could sort of slap them on the wrist and say, you know, you stick to minding your chickens and we'll take care of the business that we have. That's it. I guess finally to Mr. Cahane's strong feeling that town meeting always gets it right. Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, Bill, but I have 356 apartments going up behind my house because town meeting changed the zoning from rural residential to highway commercial. I think probably, I don't know if Mr. Malaguti was on the board when that happened, but we are now going to have 350 apartments and their residents emptying into exit 5. As you
Just
know.
make- That's a 40B, and the 40B zoning law supersedes town meeting and our local bylaws. So that wasn't town meeting's fault why you got the 40B behind you. Just to let you know, I was, just to clarify.
Town meeting changed the
Town meeting
zoning.
does not always get it right. I stand corrected, but that wasn't one of the ones that they got wrong. That's something that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts imposes on us because we don't have 10% of our housing stock deemed affordable. So that's how that 40B transpired. But point taken. I'll correct my
That's all.
statement in the
That's all.
future.
Thank you. Thank you. Great job.
Thank you, Peter. Kevin, you remembered. Go ahead.
Well, hopefully I did. Mike, my thought is that you're a third of the way through your examining of the government and, piggybacking on Mr. Neville's comments that it would be nice to let the people know what your thoughts are as they start to coalesce and, become a little bit more concrete. And my question on top of this is that is there going to be, and I do not remember the actual term, is there going to be a public presentation, forum, discussion? I forget what that was that you had like on the third meeting. Is there going to be another one of those relatively soon?
Well, Kevin, according to the statute, we have to have at least one more. We could have more than that, but we were required to have one in September at the time when we present our preliminary report, which is like a first draft of a charter, just a first draft. And then we're supposed to have a public hearing, which we definitely will have. Whether we do a public hearing before that or not is up to this commission to decide. But once we get to September, things are going to happen very visibly within the public view, with a lot of public input, because for 2 months, starting in September, we completely state what we're proposing. The town can react to it, speak at the public hearing. And then by November, we produce a second, what the statute calls our final report. And that again gets totally ventilated with the town for the next 3 months. It goes to the select board, and then we have December and January, and it's going to go to every townsperson. They're going to get it in their mailbox. And it's also going to be in the newspaper. And then we finally have the vote in September, in the spring of 2023. So this commission may decide to have a hearing in the early summer. I don't know if you can see our ideas are just beginning to coalesce. So that's up to us in the weeks ahead, what we do next.
I appreciate that, sir. I'm just hoping that you would be open to folks expressing a little bit more concretely some of their ideas rather than reacting. I hope it's not a reaction, but rather than reacting to a report in September, which is like, shucks, that's 8 months away. Between now and then, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months from now, it'd be nice to be able to have people. I'm again, sorry, pulling rank with my teacher background, but I would like the students, sorry, again, if I don't want to do this and label you like that, but I always would like my students, let me see what you've been working on, what you're working towards, and let me try to guide it. Not that I'm saying that the citizens will be doing that for you, but at least they could see what you folks are heading towards. And they might be able to say, well, wait a minute, what about this? Rather than in September, and all of a sudden trying to, change it at the last minute per se. So that's my concern, is that, shucks, between now An 8-month time interval, 2, 3, 4 months from now would be very, very nice to have a public hearing.
Kevin,
Thank you.
thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
I understand what you're saying, but I want to make one point again, that every one of our meetings is televised. You can watch it. You can hear the ideas being tossed around here tonight. Anybody that tunes in is going to know exactly what we're thinking, because we don't do anything in private. It's all done here on the screen. Every idea we have is floated to the rest of us. We don't send private emails or anything outside this.
I
public
agree.
screen.
And with all due,
You're
make one more thing, with all due respect, piggybacking on Peter Neville's comment, what he was trying to communicate, it would be nice to have the people of Plymouth know very clearly that you folks are in existence, because I will tell you, I know for a fact that there's a very, very small number of people that are tuning in. And yet at the same time, it's going to affect a large number of people. And how do we go and communicate what you folks are doing to that large number of people? And I'd prefer not to say, shame on you, you never tuned in because it was a public meeting. So that's my experience in the past. And I am exercised about that, and I've seen it happen. So I hope that you would be sympathetic toward that particular line of thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Michelle?
There is no one else.
Okay, great. Or sad or whatever. We're always happy to hear from public comment. I think we're getting near the end of our meeting, so I'd like to return to our agenda. We have the minutes to be approved from, was it the last meeting? Gotta find them. So it's the
I will move them, Bill.
minutes of the
Second,
January 3rd meeting. Somebody moved
second,
it?
Yeah, I moved them, Bill.
Any changes to the minutes? Then we'll take a vote on the approval of the January 3rd minutes. All in favor?
aye.
Then that passes. Is there any new business?
Yes, Mr. Chair. A suggested invitee for a future meeting. Someone pointed out to me that Bernie Lynch, who was the headhunter, the person who kind of expedited finding the town manager candidates, Dave Malaguti was part of the committee, but I understand that he's familiar with many towns in Massachusetts, towns and cities, and could potentially offer some insights on the strengths and weaknesses of the different forms of government that he has witnessed in his experience. Just a thought. Dave Malaguti, I mean, I'd heard this suggestion from Steve Bulletin, who was just impressed by Bernie Lynch.
I was equally impressed, and I gave that contact information to Bill last meeting or the one before. I gave that to him already.
Okay, so now you have it twice, Bill.
Very good. Does he have a position that you already know, or is this, are you waiting to hear what he has to say?
As I understand it, waiting to hear what he has to say, because he's worked with towns with different forms of government.
Okay, well, it's certainly up to this commission to decide who their guests will be. So David, do you want to make the suggestion and we'll see if everyone is in favor? Or-
I'll make that suggestion.
So it's been suggested by Mr. Peck that Mr. Lynch be invited to come to this meeting and tell us his ideas. Wrestling, I see your hand is up. Are you seconding it? Seconded. Okay, so any other discussion? All in favor of inviting Mr. Lynch to this meeting? Mr. Bernie Lynch, raise their hand. So I count 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyone opposed to it? Well, in the interest of hearing all points of view, I think it probably makes sense if he would like to come and speak for, that'd be great. So David, do you want to reach out to him?
I'd ask if David Malaguti can, because he sat in the same room and worked with him.
I will
So
do that.
So
I have not
he's
met him.
coming in as a neutral speaker. He's just going to
Yes.
speak about neutral. He's not pro anything. He's just kind of talking about his experience out there. Okay.
All right, done.
Done.
Any other new business? Any old business? Then it's
Motion to close.
motion to adjourn by Mr. Brewster, second by
Second.
Mr. Peck. All in favor of adjourning this meeting? All in favor?
Thank you, everyone.
Adjourn. Thank you very much. And we will be back on February 7th. Thank you.
Thank you.